good morning.
Good morning,
How
Mika.
are you?
I'm feeling great.
Look at
a little
us.
busy,
Look
right?
at,
Yeah.
look
Here
at
we
us.
are. Here we are.
We are here. Yeah, you've been busy. I'm sorry I cut you off. Yeah.
No, I mean, but we feel good, and what I tell my wife is we have until next Tuesday at 7 p.m. and then we can take a deep breath.
Absolutely. So this is on the heels of last night's debate, the first runoff debate. How you feeling after that performance?
It's good. I will say that debates are a little frustrating when you've been there. Even the forums where you get a really complicated issue and you get a minute to respond, and that can be pretty tough because a lot of these things are nuanced, and you have to get to the weeds. And my team often gets frustrated with me because I'm somebody that likes to explain why and where I'm coming from versus just give a soundbite.
Right. Well, that's why we're here.
That's right.
We're here to have a more long-form conversation. As someone who tried, my darndest to get to where you are right now and to be in contention, I feel like my vantage point, my experience as a former candidate, and also just me being a progressive voice in Charleston, it was really important to sit down with you,
Sure.
Clear the air. Also, maybe shed light on some things, explain, your vantage point. I really want to introduce you to more people, not because it's necessarily beneficial for me, but I think, like I've said on the campaign trail, we need to heighten the level of discourse around a lot of these issues.
Right.
And hopefully we can do that and people can get a better sense as to where you stand. And so this is it. We'll get to the Q&A. So I'm just going to ask you a few questions.
Sure.
And please be as candid as possible. And I will be reading the questions because they are quite they are lengthy. What the first one is.
Well, before you get into that, I do want to just say I appreciate you doing this. I appreciate your willingness to do this because I do think while clearly on the campaign trail we don't agree on everything, but it does show. And it's taught me and demonstrated, frankly, I hope to the public that two opposing sides can come together for progress. And
we have to.
And you have to if you're going to actually make any sort of meaningful change.
Right. This can't be about your team versus my team. It has to be a little bit more collaborative. So I hope.
What team?
I don't want to even talk about sports right now. all my teams are horrible. But yeah, we definitely want to find where there's common ground. If we can build something important,
Yeah.
Let's do it.
So.
All right. I wanted to use a developer metaphor, like common ground developer.
There we go.
Let's develop solutions.
Okay. Easy.
All right. First question is William. All right. I've spent a lot of my time working on the west side of Charleston, specifically the Gadsden Green community. As co-chair of the Friends of Gadsden Creek, I have worked to press the city to restore and revitalize the Gadsden Creek. When the city entered into an agreement with West Edge to develop that area, the original plan of development was to restore and revitalize the creek. The creek was listed as an asset, but when the city changed its height ordinance, that land became needed as part of the development or part of a development phase to make the funding work. City leadership has used an old excuse as reason to fill the creek, claiming that the creek is contaminated. Contaminated land has been a claim made by our city leadership over the history of Charleston to move historically black communities off of the peninsula. Many are suspicious that this is what is happening on the west side in the Gadsden Green area. We have debunked the city's claim of contamination over and over again. Engineering experts like Joshua Robinson, who you met on Friday very briefly, have given the city many smart examples of ways in which the creek could be a beautiful asset for the community. You've made smart growth for Charleston a pillar of your platform. If you were elected mayor, would you work with myself, the Friends of Gadsden Creek, and the residents of the Gadsden Green area, along with CAJM, the Charleston Area Justice Ministry, to restore and revitalize the creek?
Yes, I would. And I think, I've read some of the lines and logic behind why the creek, what the economic arguments are, but I mean, when you have a public project like this, and it comes down to funding, well, again, I think that the government entities have a responsibility first to the people that live there. And so, we need to understand exactly what that delta is or what that need is financially, and I think it can be solved for. And it may change what the development of West Edge is, and that's okay. Because what's happened to date is there have been a lot of butting heads, and nothing positive is getting done. So again, you have to sometimes take a fresh look at things. And if you start with principles first and putting residents first, I think as a government, and particularly in the city this case, the mayor's office needs to have, again, the residents' views and needs first.
Right.
And if that is to restore Gadsden Creek, absolutely.
Right, right. You spent some time in that area. You created content to help amplify your platform in that area. Before I pose that question, what was your vision for that area, that community?
You talking about West Edge or just the whole West Side?
The West Side.
Yeah, the West Side is a very diverse group, and I think it's one of the, I would say, more affordable places still to live downtown on the peninsula. I think it's important to keep that element to it. Specifically, I would say when you talk about Gadsden Green and the housing projects that are there, it was really telling for me to go take a tour and sit down with some of the residents at Gadsden Green, and just see the condition of that housing. And it's embarrassing. I mean, it is. I mean, I was with a woman who is probably 80 years old. Maybe I don't want to offend her. Maybe we'll say she was 60, and but couldn't have been nicer. I believe her name was Miss Betty Whaley, and she has asthma and has an oxygen tank. And you look around her apartment, and there's mold everywhere. I mean, and this is government housing. And so that to me is embarrassing and shameful, and I think needs to be addressed pretty head on. And the good news is that there are opportunities in their federal programs and their state programs, and there are things that can be done to really revitalize and revamp a lot of the affordable housing stock that exists on the peninsula in particular.
Yeah, I was going to ask a follow-up because in previous conversations you've lifted up some ideas that have emerged on the campaign trail.
Sure, yeah.
So are you looking to implement or incorporate ideas you've heard? Just,
Yeah, look, I mean, it's been a great education. I mean, one of the things about having 6 candidates in the field is that everybody came with their own platform and ideas. And as I said last night, I mean, I learned a lot. And that was pretty powerful because 5 of us, the 5 people challenging the incumbent, I mean, you tell me your thoughts on it, but I think we all kind of got along. We respected one another. We felt like it was a pretty positive campaign. I mean, yeah, you'd hit me a little bit, and that's fine. I mean, but that's part of politics.
It is.
And it's genuine. It's sincere. It is like there's a concern that you're a developer, so I'm going to point this out that you're a developer, right? I mean, and I got to respond to that, right? And I think that is where you have civil discourse and different ideas come out. And so when you get back to some of the points that have been made over the campaign, particularly when it comes to things like affordable housing, there were some great ideas. And just because they weren't my ideas doesn't mean I shouldn't incorporate them when I'm mayor. I mean, the Choice Neighborhood program that Clay had mentioned, the fact that the city hasn't applied for that is embarrassing. And that's $50 million of federal funds that can go directly towards affordable housing. Your idea, I think, and I'm just buttering you up here, Mika,
you've taken my ideas a couple times. So
right, whatever.
Keep going.
But the point on workforce housing zoning, right, where a lot of the people in today's world, it hasn't really been adjusted, that it doesn't really provide affordability. And again, there's a strong case in point that was brought to my attention where, and I mentioned it last night, where you have a teacher that is a second-year teacher at Sanders Clyde, and she couldn't afford or qualify for the affordable units across the street.
Right.
Something's wrong with that zoning, and that is such an easy thing to change. And I think the development community would welcome it, again, because that's one of the benefits of me understanding development is I can speak that language and they can say, well, you know, that'll blow the budget. And you're like, well, you can adjust it this way and that way, or this is a push you could pull here, and you can work it out.
Yeah, that's encouraging to hear. Yeah, given your profession, it's encouraging to hear at least rhetorically the political will to want to actually implement changes that make housing more accessible and affordable. I want to move on to the next question, which is probably the question because it has dominated discourse online, and while some of us might not want to give too much attention or energy to social media, it's something that we want to clear up. I want to have you clear it up for yourself.
Sure, I appreciate it.
So as a candidate, I was initially very pleased to see how much respect each of our contemporaries extended to one another. At least that was the case for a time period. As Election Day neared, we saw what some may characterize as dirty politics make its way into the race. You've personally been on the receiving end of some of the more negative campaign messaging and have been labeled a, quote, extremist, who is collaborating with groups like Moms for Liberty. For the record, what's your relationship to this group, and how do you respond to attempts made to paint you as an extremist?
Well, I'll start with Moms for Liberty. I have no relationship with them. They are not supporting me. I'm not supporting them. They've never been involved in my campaign. I've never been involved in any of their efforts. This is a claim being made by John. It's really a lie because he knows this is not factual. That, getting back to your social media, I mean, it literally came from a comment on a Facebook page. And that to me does not equate to fact. And it's really frustrating because I think what he's trying to do is divide. You know, he's trying to put people into two different camps so that, you know, it's his only shot at winning, I think, at this point. And honestly, I got into this race because I don't want to put people into camps. I think this is a nonpartisan race for a reason. And if you're going to actually get meaningful things done, you can't have a divided city. Your job as mayor is to bring people together. And that is going to be conservative people and liberal people. And that is going to be Democrats and Republicans. That is going to be black and white. I mean, that is how we're going to move our city forward. And in terms of me being an extremist, it's a bit of a joke. I mean, nothing in my record, and I have 6 years of votes in politics, would point to any sort of extremism. The running joke up in Columbia was, you know, you're a Republican, but everybody in the upstate thought I was a Democrat, and then all the Democrats, you know, so it was just, I was a bit of a person without a home, being a moderate. I think that's a rare thing in politics these days. And candidly, it's one of the reasons I decided to run for mayor, because when you do public service, I think you can appreciate this, you want to be effective. You know, it's a lot of time and effort. It is, you get a lot of attacks. You got to have really thick skin, which doesn't really bother me. But when things like this are said, it's so counterproductive. And even I can deal with the fact that, I mean, him saying these things, we've been getting threats, I've been getting threats, my family's been getting threats.
Oh, really? Seriously?
I mean, yeah, and so it's just unacceptable and so counterproductive, right? And honestly, as I said the other night, I've always thought of John as a nice person, just not a very competent mayor. And the actions the past few days have shown me that he doesn't have integrity. He's willing to knowingly lie, and it's been really frustrating and just disappointing, especially given how I thought productive the campaign was. I mean, we've been at this for a year, and that this is coming out in the last 10 days or whatever. Again, it's not overly a surprise, but the level to which he's going to keep this narrative up and the deception that he's pulled, that we've caught him in. I mean,
Right.
there's a whole document stack that demonstrates he set up the PAC and he paid $10,000 to the lawyer that set up the PAC that then made the Moms for Liberty claim. And, we traced it all back to him, but yet he still keeps saying it. And the other thing that was interesting, the other kind of, not to dig into this, but it's clearly annoyed me a little bit.
We want you to dig in. I want to hear this, yeah.
He points out the fact that a member of the school board donated to my campaign. And what I guess he doesn't want everyone else to know is she also donated to his campaign.
I did my research and I found it to be true.
Right.
Yes.
So, I mean, and then couple that with the fact that the entities and organizations that have endorsed John, the Post and Courier, the Chamber of Commerce, the City Paper, endorsed Pam McKinney too.
Right.
So look, he's, I guess, per his logic, more Moms for Liberty than I am in terms of a track record. So again, it is meant to divide us.
Right.
I'm going to continue in my campaign to run a clean campaign.
Right.
Because there's plenty of data and information that you could throw and mud that can be thrown. I just don't find it productive. And again, for me, it's not just about winning, but it's how you win.
Right.
Because that's going to define how you govern and how you can bring people together.
Right. I did want to, we were talking a little bit before the interview about last night's debate. I remarked to Treva and some others about the tail end, the closing statements. I did want to give you a moment to kind of address, if you don't mind. I know we'll move on to the next question, but there were some other erroneous claims. I characterize them as erroneous claims made at the very tail end. Can you just shed light on that? Because you were trying to rebut, of course, and it was really...
Yeah, look, he says that we introduced shadow. I mean, look, there are PACs involved. There are PACs involved for him that seem to be going for him. There are other ones that seem to be going for me. I don't frankly know much about them.
Right.
And the only one I do know that has been, that he kind of referenced is flyers going out.
Right.
Were positive messages about me, said nothing else about any of the other candidates. It was not a smear campaign or anything like that, at least that I know of.
Right.
And he's certainly not been able to point. And he made that claim, though, that we have been hitting other candidates, which is just absolutely not true. The only person that has been involved in dirty politics or kind of the smear tactics that you see has been John's campaign. And again, that's not what I want to have in a mayor.
Right. Thank you for that. My next question.
Now you got my blood up.
I know. I'm gonna let's see if we can cool it.
A little bit.
Let's see if we can cool it down. Right. Let's see if we can bring it back to the issues.
Right.
All right. In recent years, I've made attempts to promote equity via policy in Charleston through my work with the Human Affairs and Racial Conciliation Committee, also known as HARC. In my opinion, the HARC could be the best place for the creation of policy ideas to bring about equity for marginalized residents of Charleston. On your website, within your statement on bringing sound governance back to the city, you listed two of many issues, and I saw flooding and affordable housing was there, that disproportionately impact communities of color. Under your administration, will you support the HARC and ensure its continuation, particularly given the fact that the HARC was created to address disparities that you've pledged to also address?
Absolutely. I mean, I think getting back to the fact that civil discourse that we had, we learned lessons from one another, right? And I think that's incredibly important. But in order to be effective, the only thing I would say on organizations or groups like the HARC or initiatives like the HARC, I think it's very powerful. It can be very productive.
Right.
The only caveat I would put in there is that it does need to have some parameters, like in terms of what are we trying to address, right?
You feel it's too broad?
Well, what happens when things don't have a general scope, it can kind of go off the rails a little bit, or it can be taken over by, a faction that tries to railroad the conversation. And again, the important part is to find common ground. Because when you get a diverse group together, you know they're going to have different opinions and perspectives, and that's important to have in the dialogue. But the role, I think, of the city, and particularly the mayor and a group like Hart, is to say, okay, guys, this is what we're trying to accomplish, and I want y'all to work this out.
Right.
And I think it could be very powerful. And again, it doesn't have to be too narrow of a focus,
Right.
but when it's basically a completely blank slate, it's hard to define a meaningful mission that can be pragmatic about implementation.
Right.
Does that make sense? I'm trying to.
No, it does. I'm just going to say something candid that is meant to be a compliment. My sense is that you shifted a little bit on this issue. I wanted to know whether or not you've had, without betraying any confidence, had any substantive conversations with area stakeholders about the aim and objectives of HARC. Like, have you spoken to local leaders? I know you shouted out a few last night during the debate, or I don't know. Like, has anyone helped you?
No, it's really not. It's not. I don't. It's not something that I have concerns over the HARC. That's not it at all.
Okay. Okay.
It is truly a desire to see it succeed.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And let's just be frank. I mean, when it comes to the issues that HARC has been looking to address, have been working on, is pretty broad reaching, right? I mean, there's a lot of issues that need to be addressed, and some of them can be addressed by the city of Charleston through things like zoning or affordable housing initiatives. Others can't. I mean, others are more the purview of the state, school board, federal, right? And those are important things to say, all right, well, we believe in this and we want to put initiatives forward, say with the state legislature and get legislation passed for an initiative, but you don't clearly have as much control over that. So that's my only point, that I think you want to start with low-hanging fruit, because I think in local government in particular, there's a ton of common ground. As I always say, the potholes aren't partisan, and a lot of these issues, I think there are very constructive ways forward, and you should start there and then build, if that makes sense.
Right. I think you might answer a question that just popped up. I think you might answer the next question, but yeah, I'll move on to the next question. Let me just do that because I think a follow-up is coming.
But I just want to be clear. I'm for the HARC, and I want to keep it going.
Okay.
100%.
That's really positive, and I'm happy that you just expressed it so emphatically.
Sorry, I clearly just gave you a long-winded answer.
No, I guess
clearly answer the question.
I guess I think the follow-up was like the HARC would require collaboration. You've demonstrated, at least to me, a willingness to collaborate. Do you feel confident about being able to advance initiatives like this in terms of, like, you said this on the campaign trail, you need, 6 votes to get things through. Do you feel confident about your ability as a leader to get support for things like HARC,
I do. I mean, I think that what my job in my career has been for 30 years is to bring a lot of different groups together. And it's one of the things that's have been problematic, I think, with the current administration is sometimes you have to just, a lot of times in government, you just have to have a clean ask. You have to define it, give your logic behind it, you have to socialize it with different people, make your pitch, take their ideas, because they're part of city government, a very important part of city government as well. Put that together and come up with a plan that works, right? And right now, that's not been happening at all. I mean, just go watch a city council meeting.
Oh, yeah.
The council members have no idea what's going to be on the agenda, and they, as one of them told me, the papers are still warm from the copier when they get it on their desk, and so they're like, okay, vote on this, and they're like, got 300 pages in front of them, and that's just no way to go. That is why we've had so much dysfunction. So collaboration. And again, I know most, if not all, of the city council members. I think they're all good people. They want to move our city forward. They have different views, but that's a good thing.
Right. Oh, well, I can appreciate that. My next question. In preparation for today's interview, my team has been in regular communication with your team. We've heard more about your vision for Charleston. What I was not expecting was a demonstrated willingness to incorporate ideas, and you kind of answered a little bit of this earlier.
Sure.
Demonstrated your willingness to incorporate other ideas from other candidates, and incorporate that into your broader vision for the city. Specifically when it comes to affordable housing. So one thing that was floated in preparation for today was perhaps supporting something like a tenant's bill of rights.
Absolutely.
Also too, and this is very important, a lot of my supporters really wanted to hear more about your vision for public safety. Again, what was discussed off camera was a willingness to introduce perhaps something along the lines of violence prevention programs. Right. Given this more collaborative approach to governing, what can residents expect from you in your first term? And I do want to again emphasize public safety because that has been a huge sticking point for folks. People are afraid that one incident 3 years ago, a social movement,
right,
will lead to just more restricted movement and a lot of other things.
Understood. Hardening of the streets, right. That's not the intent. I mean, I have been clear that I do believe in basic enforcement of the law. I mean, you know, if you have a rule, it should be followed. If you enable bad behavior, it starts to multiply, right? So I do stand firm on that. But you make really good points, as did Clay. I mean,
right. I understand.
Clay.
Yeah, it's
so
okay.
many mistakes. But in terms of not just focusing on, again, the riots or crime as it may be, but how and why a lot of this happens. And so violence prevention programs, I think, are a pretty strong place to start. I also mentioned, and this is through conversations early on in my campaign with like Wendell Gilliard and other members, like actually meeting with members of the East Side was one of my first meetings. And it was just interesting to learn that a lot of these smaller crimes are done by kids, like pretty young kids. And what was an interesting connection that I hadn't really thought of is that a lot of the after-school programs that have been traditionally sponsored by the city, be it sports, but not just sports, other different types of programs, have been gutted because of budgetary concerns, right? Well, that to me is frustrating because it's a small budget issue that then starts to compound into a societal issue, right? So for me, there's some things that can be done there, and it doesn't always have to come from the city's budget. It can also, you can lean into the private sector and say, look, I want you to sponsor the Little League team or sponsor this art program or what have you at your local playground, and people will do that. And the mayor has a bully pulpit that can lean on them to do that. And one thing I've learned, and I know about Charleston, is that it's a pretty engaged community and wants to help.
Right.
And if you, again, it goes back to, if you have an organized ask for them, then they're going to probably say yes, right?
Okay.
And I want to also point this thing out, this aspect out too, and I don't want this to sound like I'm shooting from the hip here, but it is important for people to understand that doing things like an after-school program, right?
Right.
It's not going to work perfect. You're going to come up with ideas and you're going to move forward on them. And you know what? After a year, something's not going to work perfectly. And what happens in government, and I've seen this in the state, and I see it locally, is that, okay, we shut it down, we stop, we set up another committee or pay a consultant to come in and study, and you know, there's like 2-3 years, and then it just kind of drifts away into nothing.
Right.
For me, what you would see from my administration is we're going to try things, and then we're going to reassess, and we're going to pivot and keep moving it forward. We're not going to just stop. We're going to be continually trying to address problems, learning from our actions, and adjusting again to make forward progress.
So I want to. This is something that my ears perked up during the campaign, on the campaign trail. You know, I hear you're saying that there's a lot of like wasted movement, just to bring in sports.
Tread and
metaphor
water.
in terms of some of the studies, right? And I've even, if you go to my website, I still have that. We've commissioned so many studies. I'm shifting to the environmental, shifting back to the environmental here. We've commissioned so many studies that we just haven't followed the recommendations. But what I was concerned with as a candidate and a resident and an environmentalist is, are you taking a stance whereas you don't want to study or further study some of the issues specifically with regard to climate change? Because I know you spend a lot of time talking about the cost and expense.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like some things require.
No, there's a balance, right?
Okay.
And the climate, we're learning more and more about climate change every day. So it's important to be on top of things, right? Absolutely. And I totally respect and understand that studies are necessary and plans are necessary. But we've gone a little overboard, in my opinion. I mean, again, the Army Corps study, and it's super confusing, and you know, frankly, the media, I think, has not done a very good job of articulating the difference between the Army Corps study, and this is an example, the Army Corps study for the perimeter protection around the peninsula versus the Army Corps study for sea level and flooding. Right?
Yeah, you've made the distinction.
Right. So, well, there are two different studies, and there's two different pieces of legislation at the federal level that define what the Corps can and can't do in each of those. So John's touting the sea level, the seawall study, we call it, right? Let's just call it the seawall study. Which, if you look at the guiding legislation, the scope that the Corps requires for that is that whatever is built, they're going to pay 65% of it, it needs to withstand a Category 5, in essence, a Category 5 hurricane on a direct hit, okay? Or storm surge is really what it's focused on. And no bio investment or infrastructure is going to prevent against a 15-foot storm surge. It will be a wall.
I'm glad you know that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, to me, when you look at the idea of spending 4 years, literally would be John's last term apparently, would spend 4 years, his entire term studying this idea and spending $40 million on a design of just city money, $40 million, for something that won't help the rest of the peninsula and won't help the rest of the city, actually will make them worse off because if an energy of a tidal surge hits the peninsula, it's going to be deflected. And so my point has been, let's focus on the Army Corps study for sea level rise and for flooding. Because you know what? In that scope, you can incorporate an elevated edge around the peninsula. It doesn't need to be for a 15-foot storm surge, but it certainly will protect against tidal flooding and might help against a Category 3, you know? So it's nuanced. I get that. People's eyes start to glaze over. But when you start talking about 4 years of study and $40 million of funding that the city doesn't have, I mean, I'm like, guys, you got to pay attention to details, right? And so, particularly on this issue, because it has been John's, you know, he loves talking about flooding, as you know. He always went over his time on that. He listened about flooding, and it's like,
I'm triggered. Wait.
Right? Yeah. I mean. And again, guys, it's a critical issue.
Right.
I mean, sea level rise is real. It is an existential threat for our city. It needs to be addressed. I don't want to waste time on things that, again, have a low probability for success at a very high number. So we just have different views on that, and I think mine's going to be a lot more productive in addressing climate change and quality of life for our residents.
It's a small follow-up because we have folks here who are committed, folks from Friends of Gadsden Creek, Marsh Project, Climate Coalition in this space right now. How hard will it be for them to engage you on this if you are elected mayor?
No, I mean, look, you have to listen and learn from people. Again, we learned that on the campaign. It is important to have area experts. I am a big believer in finding solutions for Charleston by Charleston, right? I mean, oftentimes, not that having outside consultants isn't important, but I think you should start with the local community. Let me give you an example, for example, like on my idea of extending just the battery around from UG Street to UG Street, because the peninsula does need an elevated edge. Lockwood floods,
Right.
You have the hospital
Right.
district, you've got Morrison Drive that floods into the housing projects there. So it needs to be addressed without question. But my idea is basically doing a battery wall around. And
No green infrastructure?
no, I think there's an opportunity there for incorporating both.
Right.
Like, you know, like for example, the retention that is the
Colonial, not Colonial.
well, is it called Long Lake? I think right there at Mason Pratt. But Colonial Lake is
Yeah,
used
okay.
in part for
Right.
in terms of retention. But or take for example Citadel Mall. That's a better example,
Right. Okay.
Of Citadel Mall is actually located in a pretty large drainage basin,
Okay.
and there's a ton of asphalt there.
Mm-hmm.
Citadel Mall needs to be redeveloped. I mean, people ain't going, you know, this
No.
isn't Stranger Things. So,
No. Is it?
You know, right.
It
Well,
might-
maybe.
It might be in the upside down.
But there's an incredible opportunity to do like
Yeah.
retention there that can be an amenity.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's things like that that are green infrastructure. The battery wall idea, elevated edge, I think can incorporate green infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
but ultimately, I mean, you do need to also have some concrete and steel.
Right. No, it needs to work
Right.
together. It's not. Yeah.
And getting back to your point on working with local groups, absolutely, I think the projects will end up being better, and that would extend too to like local engineering firms. I mean, again, the idea of the core study, you know, bringing in national and international firms. I'm like, we just built the battery, you know, redeveloped it, and there are some local engineering firms and there's soil borings that you can figure out, and you can come up with a pretty viable plan in 3 months,
Right.
and start pricing it to see if it works, right? And figure out how and who you need to go to get matching funds. So that's the kind of just mentality that I bring to it, not like, okay, we're going to pay $400 or $1 million or $1.8 million for a study. Outside consultants are going to spend, you know, 6 months to 2 years looking at it and doing all the soil borings and samples that we already have access to. I mean,
Right.
it's just, again, I think being more proactive about addressing this issue in a pragmatic way.
Right.
And that does start with local groups. Again, I give you a very long-winded answer.
No,
But
I
the
appreciate
answer is
it.
yes.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm sure folks would appreciate you hearing
Yeah.
that response. Yeah, I know we're nearing the conclusion of our interview. I think one last question, it just came to my mind because
These
my
are the
friend-
dangerous ones,
No,
Mika.
it's not.
Okay.
No, it's not. It's not. I swear.
Okay.
No, but one thing that came to mind, a friend in the room, Sully, is a business owner, and you've spoken to this on the campaign trail as well in terms of making business for business owners more efficient, trying to get permits, and I've even spoken to deregulation as being something. Would you like to speak to that as well, like the economy, the people who make up the small business
Yeah,
economy?
look, man. I mean, there's a concerning trend happening in a lot of cities right now, and it's in large part tied to commercial real estate and what's happening there post-COVID, and with the economy kind of slowing down pretty significantly, interest rates being so. It's a very real headwind that we have right now, and what keeps I think a city afloat and also gives it character is local development. And that could be, when I say development, these are the smaller projects, the infill projects that happen that are financed by local banks, and it can be a local business owner, a dentist that's going to want to renovate a building on Johns Island that they're going to move their office into, or opening up a store down. Right now, it is so difficult for them to go through the process at the city. It's so dysfunctional And again, I'm not trying to bash people at the city.
No.
I think they're really good people at the city, but I heard this so many times on the campaign trail that, you know, it's taking me 9 months to get my X, Y, and Z inspection, or, you know, a year and a half to get my building permit. And local businesses can't afford that. I mean, and that is crushing that character that is so important and what everybody loves about not just downtown. I mean, it's West Ashley, it's Johns Island, James Island, and even Daniel Island. So supporting that for me is one of the top priorities. And I think it's going to also help steer us through what I think is going to be a pretty difficult economic time over the next couple of years.
There's some foresight there.
Yeah. Right.
Well, thank you for handling that curveball. It wasn't that bad, right? No, but I appreciate this time and your candid responses, and I look forward to just hearing and seeing more.
I appreciate you doing this again. This, I think, is important.
Yeah. I made some folks nervous.
Made me a little nervous.
Yeah, Spider-Man meme. Yeah, absolutely. But I do appreciate this.
No,
Thank you
thanks,
so
Mika.
much.
Thank you. Yeah,
Take care.